Welcome, Dr. Epic here. And what we're going to discuss in this lecture is reality, naming cars, death wands, and perceived apocalypses, ghost worlds, and all that stuff. We are going to talk about culture and subjective realities. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow that outline right up above my head. And we're going to talk about how humans don't really interact with the objective world. They live in an objective world, but they don't really interact with it. Humans live in a subjective reality. A subjective reality is the worldview, which is also called a cosmology, of any given population. It may or may not have any relationship to objective reality, but a subjective reality are these sets of symbols and images and beliefs that are projected onto the real world. And I want you to look at these three images that I've placed at the top here. On the far left, there's a young boy walking on a tightrope across a huge canyon. Except he's not. The rope is painted on. The canyon is just a painted floor. On the second image, you have architecture hanging like drapes off the side of a building. Except it's not. All of this is painted on. All of that draped architecture is merely a painted illusion. It's not real. Right up above me, this looks just like a normal house, except, I mean, it's just an archway and a door. Those windows are all painted on, all right? This is really just a blank brick wall over a door, but a really clever painter made it look like a house. He painted these windows on. The windows aren't really there. They have no objective reality. This is what humans do with their concepts of subjective reality. Images, beliefs, ideas, and concepts are projected onto an objective world, but people then act as if the painted material is real, and all humans do this. They attempt to interact with the social reality that exists, not the objective world as it really harshly exists. Now, nobody really knows why this is. Current theories argue that it has something to do with the way that the human brain evolved. And the theory goes that, early humans inhabited these social networks, and the humans with bigger brains were able to have a larger Dunbar's number and were able to sort of socially manipulate the other early humans around them, and therefore gain some kind of differential reproductive success, and then pass on their socially manipulative bigger brains onto their ancestors, and then so on and so forth. And here we are 150,000 years later, attempting to socially interact with an objective world that doesn't really care what our opinion is. And the argument is that the individuals that were able to socially manipulate the environment, had more sexual partners and therefore had greater amounts of offspring. And so we attempt to socially manipulate the natural world. We often attempt to socially interact with objects that are not going to interact with us. I mean, this is why we do things that, everybody accepts this as normal, but if you actually think about it, it makes no sense whatsoever. We name mountains. We name rivers. We name the land. The land does not care what we call it. It objectively has no name. The Mississippi River, the father of waters, doesn't care what we call it, but we give it a name and we attempt to socially interact with this non-living object. And we do this all the time. Do you name your car? I've accidentally named all of my cars. I never made a decision, I'm going to name a car. I had two Thunderbirds, and I named them both the same thing. They were the Thunder Chicken. They were very, very iffy cars. And the Lincoln I have now accidentally just started calling it Mary Todd, and now the car is now called Mary Todd because Mary Todd Lincoln. People do this accidentally. They name their cars. And they talk to their cars. We are attempting to socially interact with these hunks of metal and rubber and plastic. The car is not alive. The car will not socially interact with us. Yet generally, it's not uncommon for people to talk to their cars, for people to pet their cars, for people to decide if their car is happy or if their car is not happy. And we do this with more than just with cars. We do this with ships. There's a very famous ship on the left, the USS Enterprise herself. And we not only name ships, we gender them as well. All ships are feminine. And you'll hear people, sailors will talk about their ships as if they were living things. That Enterprise, she was a good ship. In fact, even the ships named after men are automatically feminine. The USS Ronald Reagan, she is a good ship. That we give these things personalities. We give these things names. We give these things genders. And then we attempt to socially interact with non-living objects. We do this because that is how our brains probably evolved. We attempted to socially manipulate the environment around us, and that just happens to include inanimate objects, ships, cars, rivers, mountains, lands. And we do this unconsciously. This is not learned. And humans do this all the time. We project meaning onto objects. So humans will see an object and then attempt to interpret this object through the learned shared behaviors acquired unconsciously through one's culture. Culture acts as this kind of perceptual lens. We automatically see something, and a culture automatically translates it for us. It takes objects from the natural world and it turns them into social objects that we can then attempt to socially manipulate. As humans, we impose meaning on our objective surroundings. We use that to create a social environment, and then we attempt to socially manipulate this environment. And culture is the tool we use to do this. Look at that object right up above my yellow box. Like, what is that thing? If you said it's a human, you're wrong. If you said it's a man, you're also wrong. If you said it's something that appears on the outside of bathroom doors, you're also wrong. That's lines and circles. That's all it is. Lines and circles. But we are human. So we see these lines and circles and then automatically translate it into a symbol for human, into a symbol for man, into a symbol that we often see on the outside of bathroom doors. We do this unconsciously, and we do it constantly. We see objects in the world, shapes, and automatically interpret them. And let's do that in a series of exercises. We can have fun with this ability to impose meaning on shapes. Look right up above my head. Like, what is that? Well, objectively, it's just shapes. That's all it is. It's black and white shapes. But do you see the vase, or do you see two humans looking at each other very close? And because we're humans, we can actually flip that meaning either way. You can go vase, faces, vase, faces. We can change how we are symbolically perceiving these abstract shapes. Now, not everyone can do this image on the left. The image on the left, what do you see there? There are two possible things you can see at the image on the left. There is the young woman looking over her right shoulder, and we're looking at her ear. Or there is an old woman wearing a hat with her chin tucked into her chest. And again, objectively, it's just shapes. It's just black and white shapes. But subjectively, you can actually flip back and forth between these two imposed images. Young woman, old woman. Young woman, old woman. And you can do this. And what you're doing is you are socially flipping these symbols back and forth in your brain. What do you see? Well, objectively, what do you see? Well, objectively, it's a Rorschach ink blot. It's an intentionally abstract image meant to give some sort of perspective on, your inner workings of your brain. But what do you see subjectively? I see two women dancing. They've got like their arms up like this. Sometimes I see an angry crab with this one. What do you see? Put that down in your notes. Now, again, we do this constantly. We create and impose images, beliefs, and concepts on an objective world, and together that shapes our subjective reality. Objectively, that is a pile of steel and copper. That's all it is. Steel and copper and glass. Objectively, that's all it is. What is it subjectively? Oh my Lord. What is that subjectively? It is Lady Liberty, Dama Libertad. She's French. She's a gift from France. She symbolizes freedom, liberty. She also symbolizes immigration, friendship. She also symbolizes New York City, tourism. This pile of steel and copper and glass can hold many different symbolic meanings simultaneously. And no one can really have a monopoly on what a object means. It can have 8 or 9 or 10 different symbolic meanings all at the same time, and none of them can be like the correct reading. It can hold all of these things at the same time. This is one of the things about symbols. It can be a multitude of symbols at the same time. Let's continue with our exercises. Objectively, immature canine. That's all it is. Immature canine. Subjectively, it's a puppy. It's cute. It's adorable. His name's Stewie. Oh my God, he's a pug. They can't take the little noses and the pugs. Oh, they're genetic abominations. I love them. Oh, poor pugs. But again, we impose meaning. We impose personalities. We name them. And they have names. Objectively, young dog, young canine. Aha. This is the thing that generally rules people's lives. What is it? Objectively, what is it? Paper. It's ink on paper. That's all it is. Objectively, it's all it is. But subjectively, good Lord. Subjectively, what is this? Money, currency, sex, power. That's what this is, subjectively. And even though it's just ink on paper, we react to it as if it has all of these subjective meanings. And it shapes our world as if it is really sex and money and power and opportunity. And we react as if it is all of those things simultaneously. And as a matter of fact, if you really want to get into like creepy things about money, I think something like most money today, something like 56 or 57% of all current dollars don't even have an objective reality. They're just zeros. They're just information on some like computer somewhere out there in the world. And most money has no objective meaning at all. I mean, I think about myself. I paid with direct deposit. I pay all my bills, through the internet. If I want to buy a soda, I just swipe my card through the machine. Most of the money I receive and most of the money I expend, I never actually see any of it. Creepy. It's this enormously powerful thing that exists because we believe it exists. It has power over us because we believe it has power over us. Because it does. Whether it exists or not is irrelevant. The little boy walking across a canyon. Objectively, he is not walking across a canyon. Objectively, this is just an illusion. The canyon is painted. The rope is painted. Even the balance beams, I think, probably fixed into the wall, into the floor. But, if that little boy really believes that there's a canyon there, if that little boy fervently believes that the canyon is real, he is going to act as if the canyon is real. Whether it objectively exists or not becomes irrelevant in terms of his own decisions. He's going to be nervous. He's going to sweat. He's going to start to cry, even though it's completely safe. Just because the canyon doesn't objectively exist, that doesn't mean he's not going to react as if it's real. Now, let's move on to a real-world example of how this works, because this is what all human cultures do. We're going to talk about death wands. And that's a death wand right up above me. And there's an Aboriginal ceremony called pointing the bone. And this is how it works. Okay, you have the Aboriginal people of Australia, the original inhabitants of Australia. And among certain groups, they have this idea of something called the kundela, the death wand. And this is how a death wand works. Australian Aborigines have a special death curse that they use on people that have broken like really, really serious crimes. Like if somebody in their tribe, if somebody in their social network has done something like really egregious, they're not just going to kill them, they're going to kill their souls. And it's generally people that break the incest taboos. They decide that they're going to kill this person, but they're not just going to like stab them or beat them to death. They're going to use a death wand and murder their very soul. And they do this through the creation of the kundela. So here's what a kundela is. They take a bone. They generally say a human femur is best, but they'll also use like ostrich, like emus or kangaroo leg bones. And they'll take the bone and they'll polish one end of it to a sharp point. All right. And then they'll wrap the other end in a cord and dribble blood on the cord. And they do this in secret. And the elders of the village come together. They decide, like, that person over there has done something really, really, really bad, and we're going to kill him spiritually. We're going to exterminate his soul. And these guys are called the Kadicha men. So when they decide to kill this person, they get sort of white dust and they paint themselves white. There's like 8 or 9 of these people. And in the middle of the day, in front of everyone in their social network, in front of everyone in their group, they'll start chanting. They'll start chanting this death chant. They're stomping their feet and they're moving in single file line. And the person in front is holding the kundela pointed at the sky. And they're chanting this eerie, high-pitched noise. And they thread their way through the group and they're coming towards the person who knows what he did, or she, I don't want to be sexist. And they will finally stop in front of this individual and they'll all start shrieking at the tops of their voices. And then the person with the death wand will lower it at the person and give them the death curse. And then they're done. The old men walk away. They drop the kundela at the feet of the person they've just cursed. And, they wash off the dust and they just go about their day. The death wand is fatal between 90 and 95% of the time. Even in the modern era, they will take these individuals, they'll take people that have received the death curse and put them like in intensive care units, in modern hospitals, hooked up to 100 beeping machines, and they will be dead within 2 weeks. Why does the kundela work? It works because the people think it's going to work, okay? They die because they think they're going to die. They die because their soul has been killed. And even though the body is still alive, they're really already dead. They die because subjectively they have been killed by this terrible curse. Now, if in 10 minutes I started hearing this high-pitched wail and the stomping of feet and my office door opens and like these Kadicha men walk in and give me a death curse, it's not going to affect me. It's not going to affect me because I don't believe in it. All right? I'm not part of their culture. I'm not part of their subjective reality. The kundela is not going to affect me. I'm probably going to find like a priest like really quick just to like make sure nothing's going to kill me. But for the most part, I'm immune to it because I'm not part of their culture. And this is the reason why prayer often works for minor ailments. Prayer works in hospitals. Somebody is very, very sick. They're in a hospital. Their friends and their family and their priest or their rabbi or their pastor or whatever will come. Everyone will pray over them. They might like give them some holy oil. And then the people will leave. And a lot of the time, the person's vitals will get better. The people think that the blessing is working because it is part of their subjective reality. They get healthier because they think they're getting healthier. Now, it's not going to like cure some horrible kind of cancer or anything, but it's going to help. And people will improve because they think they're going to improve, because their subjective reality tells them they're going to improve. And again, if I'm sick in the hospital and, and all these priests come in and bless me, it's probably not going to help me because I'm not part of that reality. Because people do not react to the world as it objectively exists. They react to the world as they subjectively perceive it to be and as shaped by their culture. And I had to include that this picture on the far left. Those are Australian gunners during World War II, and they're shooting at Japanese planes. They're like going to bomb northern Australia. And I want you to note, they've tied a kundela onto the end of their gun. So as they're shooting at the Japanese planes, they're like death cursing them the whole time. And humans do this all the time. Humans do this constantly. Humans live and die over subjective values that are projected on objects that are, objectively, they're just pieces of stone. They're just heaps of rock. There on the bottom left, that's a church in Cairo that people that Muslim extremists have set on fire, and that the Egyptian Christians are trying to defend. Objectively, what is it? It's a building. Doesn't mean anything. It's a pile of stone. But subjectively, oh my God! Subjectively, it's the religion. It's the community. It's all of these. It's belief. It's the holy house of this patriarchal spirit. It's all of those things simultaneously. It has all of these symbolic values projected onto a pile of stone. Right up above me, that's called the Babri Mosque. And the story of the Babri Mosque is really interesting. In the Middle Ages, northern India was conquered by these Muslim armies. And these Muslim armies built these mosques. And one of the mosques they built was the Babri Mosque, which is right up above me. And the local legend is that the Babri Mosque was built on top of a Hindu shrine. And now we're going to advance to the modern day. This took place about, I think, 20 years ago. That in the middle of this religious festival, this Hindu religious festival at Babri, this like religious radio host started chanting these Hindu prayers and started saying that, oh my God, we need to rescue this ancient shrine. We need to tear down the Babri Mosque. And everyone was listening to this popular religious radio host, and 5,000 people showed up and tore this mosque apart using their bare hands. They ripped down this like 800-year-old building to the foundation stones. Objectively, it's just rocks. Objectively, it's just a pile of stone. It's just a building. Subjectively, oh my Lord. Subjectively, it's conquest and religions in conflict and meaning and community and the holy spirits. Symbolically, subjectively, it's all of those things. Objectively, it's rocks. Now, if you look at that picture on the upper left, if you haven't recognized it already, whoo, there we go. The most contentious building in the world. Objectively, what is it? Objectively, what is that thing on the upper left? It's a pile of rocks. It's a pile of rocks, bit of gold on top. That's about it. But subjectively, oh my Lord, subjectively, that is the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the center of Jerusalem. It is also the Jewish Temple Mount, the remains of the great last temple of the Jewish faith. It's both of those things simultaneously. Wars have been fought over that building. Like thousands of people have died over the name that gets applied to that building. That is the importance of subjective reality. That's what people do. And now a story from Africa. The story of Nongawuse's prophecy. Now that's Nongawuse right up above me. Who was Nongawuse? Nongawuse was a girl who belonged to a group in Africa called the Zosa. I can't pronounce that correctly because the XH is one of those click sounds, and I don't do them very well. Now, the Zosa, if you look at the map, the different colors are different Zosa groups. And that's the Zosa as they existed in 1856. The Zosa are a people of southern Africa. They were and are, they're still around today. They're pastoralists with their wealth residing in these very large herds of cattle. Now, traditional Zosa religion consisted of ancestor veneration and this idea that potent ancestors inhabit this nearby spirit world, and that spirit world can be accessed by these prophetesses, these young girls who were called spirit singers, and could go into these trances and talk to the gods and the spirits and the ancestors that existed in the spirit world just beyond the range of human perception. Now, that's what the Zosa believe in. And historically, the Zosa were in a lot of trouble in the 19th century. And by 1856, the Zosa were completely surrounded by hostile enemies. To the south of the Zosa, there was the growing colony of Cape Town, the British Empire, pushing north into Zosa land. To the north, the most powerful nation in southern Africa, KwaZulu, the Zulu Empire, which was spreading across of Africa, incorporating people and land and cattle into itself. And to the west were the Afrikaners, these group of Dutch settlers by the Orange River, heavily armed and very, very proprietary about what land was theirs. So 1856, the Zosa are completely surrounded. They're surrounded by powerful, aggressive, well-armed enemies pressing in from all sides. The Zosa needed help, and the Zosa had been in this situation for a long time. Every year, their enemies pressed on them a little harder. Every year, the cattle herds grew smaller and the cattle grew more sickly. And every year, religious fervor began to build among the Zosa. This idea that the only help that's going to come to them is going to come from the spirit world and is going to come through these young spirit singers. And then comes Nonkawuse. There she is, Nonkawuse. Nonkawuse is a spirit singer. And at one of these sort of spiritual revivals, she goes into this huge trance. And she starts singing to the spirits, and she starts talking to the gods and the ancestors. And she comes out of this trance with a prophecy. And the prophecy is that the gods have heard you. The ancestors in the spirit world have heard your prayers. They know that the Zosa are in a lot of trouble, and they're going to come to the help of the Zosa. They've gathered together all of the great mythic warriors of the Zosa. They've gathered together these spirit ancestors. They've gathered together the great gods of the Zosa. They've gathered together these huge herds of spirit cattle, and they're going to help the Zosa Nation. But in order to open the gates to the spirit world, to let all of these heroes and gods and spirit cattle through these gates, sacrifice is required. That small sacrifices will allow you to talk to the spirit world, but to open a door to the spirit world requires fantastic sacrifice. And this is Nonkawuse's prophecy. She says, we have to kill the cattle, our source of wealth and our source of food and sustenance. We have to kill the cattle to open the doors to the spirit world. We don't just have to kill some of the cattle. We have to kill all of the cattle. Only by the death and sacrifice of our entire tribal wealth can we open the gates to the spirit world. And the Zosa do it. And even the people that are reluctant to do it get pressured into it. Because, you don't want to be the one guy who doesn't sacrifice his cattle. You don't want to be the one person who didn't allow the gods and mythic heroes to come help us. When the mythic heroes are going to come through, they're going to kill the Afrikaners, they're going to kill the English, they're going to kill the Zulu, and they're going to bring back all of the cattle we sacrifice anyway. So you might as well join us and help open up the spirit world. And that's what Nonkawuse's prophecy did. And that's what the Zosa Nation did in 1856. Within the space of 4 months, they kill 300,000 cattle. The entire Zosa Nation collapses into famine and death. They start to starve to death. They're buried in these massive mass graves all across the Zosa Nation today. Over 40,000 people starved to death by the end of 1857. In fact, almost all of them were about to starve to death. 80% of the Zosa Nation starved to death because of Nongawuse's prophecy and because of the great cattle killing frenzy. And if you want to read a really good book about it, there's that book right up above my head. It's this mass delusion of an entire nation that commits a national suicide. In fact, the only reason that the Zosa survive at all is that they're incorporated into the British Empire. The British, who had been like really embarrassed by their failure to help the Irish during the Irish potato famine in the 1840s, come to the aid of the Zosa, and they bring them food and they bring them supplies. And the 20% of the Zosa that survived basically because of the British. But I mean, the British did other things. The British forced them to become part of the British Empire, and it forced them to accept Christianity. So the Zosa became part of the British Empire. And this is the question. This is my question to you. Why did they do it? Why did these people kill 300,000 cattle? Why did they commit national suicide on such a massive scale? They did it because people do not react to the world as it objectively exists. They react to the world as they subjectively perceive it to be and as it's shaped by their culture. That's why they do this. Now, I don't want to pick on Australian Aborigines. I don't want to pick on the Zosa. They're a wonderful people. All human cultures do this, including our own. One of the pathologies of Western civilization, American civilization, European civilization, one of our own cultural pathologies is not, death wands. It's not the idea if we kill all of our cattle, we're going to open a door to the spirit world. One of the pathologies of Western civilization is that we constantly think the world is going to end. All right? We have, for over 200 years, we have been obsessed with the destruction of our own culture. And we think that the world is going to end in about 15 to 20 years. We do this all the time. And it goes all the way back. Around the turn of the century, around 1900, you can find these articles being written about how the world is going to run out of coal. And we're going to run out of coal and our entire industrial revolution is going to collapse. In the 1920s and 30s, it was aerial bombardment. In fact, Charles Lindbergh wrote an essay about how aerial bombardment is going to destroy civilization because you can't protect yourself from bombs falling through the air. In the 1950s and 60s, it was nuclear war. Nuclear war is going to bomb us all back to the Stone Age, and the clouds of radiation are going to kill all life on the planet. There were movies about it. There were books about it. In the 1970s, that's what the Time article is on the upper left. Ice Age. There's going to be a coming Ice Age. And in the 1970s, they said we're at the dawn of a new Ice Age, and the Earth is going to be frozen over by the year 1990. There's going to be a mile of ice on top of Chicago, which would probably improve the place, I do have to say. But it didn't come. There was no Ice Age. Y2K. Do you remember Y2K? Oh my God, people didn't program a fourth digit into the dates. And at the end of 1999, all the computers are going to go nuts. The nuclear reactors are going to melt down and planes are going to fall out of the sky and all the electronics will quit working. There we go, Y2K. It's already too late. And they started talking about how Y2K was going to destroy the world by the early 1990s. Again, Western civilization thinks that the world is going to end between 12 and 20 years from now. Who remembers the Maya apocalypse? The end of the world, 2012. Oh my God. It's going to be the turning of the 13th Baktun, and the world is going to end, and the stars are going to fall out of the sky, and the dolphins are going to crawl out of the water, and it's going to be crazy. And they started talking about 2012 right after Y2K didn't happen. Didn't happen. The world is just fine. The peak oil. I remember this. They were talking about this around like 2003, 2004, 2005, when oil was really expensive and there were these big wars in the Middle East. It's the end of oil, peak oil. The world is going to run out of oil. Our cars are going to stop working, and stars are going to fall out of the sky, and the dolphins are going to come out of the water. It's going to be the end of the world. And it never happened. And they invented like 8 new technologies, and now gas is like cheaper than it's ever been. The world is not running out of oil. We have lots of it. An Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore's science fiction documentary. Global warming is going to kill us all. It's, oh my God, we only have 12 to 20 years to save the planet. America's going to get racked by a killer hurricane every year, multiple killer hurricanes a year. The polar ice caps are going to melt. Stars are going to fall out of the sky. The dolphins are going to come out of the water. None of it ever happened. Al Gore makes like 9 environmental predictions in An Inconvenient Truth. None of them came true. And we do this all the time. We're doing this right now, as a matter of fact. Apocalypse warning. End of the world and the return of Jesus within a few years. The end is near. The stars are going to fall out of the sky and the dolphins are going to come out of the water. It's going to be the end of the world. Extinction Rebellion. Oh my God, Extinction Rebellion. We're killing the earth through climate change. We have only 12 years to save the earth. And in 12 years, you know the drill. The stars are going to fall out of the sky. The dolphins are going to come out of the water. We do this constantly. One of our own pathologies in Western civilization is we're obsessed with the destruction of our own civilization. We will be fine. Extinction Rebellion, we will be fine. And you know what? If it is the end of the world and there are only a few survivors left in 12 years, track me down and I'll buy you a Coke. But, you know, we don't believe, Western civilization doesn't believe in spirit worlds, that you can sacrifice cattle. It doesn't believe in death wands. But we do believe that we're all going to die in 12 years. And there's lots of research has been done on this. Probably the best has been Arthur Herman's book, The Idea of Decline in Western History. And what he basically argues is that this concept that the world is going to end in 12 to 20 years comes out of our belief in the Enlightenment and in our belief in progress, that we have this innate cultural belief that every generation is supposed to have it a little better and a little easier than the previous generation, and we work very hard to make this happen, to improve the world. But the flip side of believing in cultural progress is also the idea of believing in cultural decline, that we can fail in our attempt to improve the world and we can make things much worse. And if we don't make the world better, then by definition, we're making it worse. And this is the reason we always think the world is going to end in 12 to 20 years. The world is not going to end in 12 to 20 years. But it's not just that the world is going to end in 12 to 20 years. It's not just that we have these big public mass movements that the end of oil or Inconvenient Truth or Y2K or Extinction Rebellion. But you have individuals that think the world is going to end and prepare for it. Mark O'Connell's just published a really interesting and really bizarre book called Notes from an Apocalypse. And it's basically about people who are like prepping for the end of the world. They're building like these underground bunkers in the desert and stockpiling on like food and equipment and ammunition because they think that the world is going to end. Our own subjective reality imposed upon an objective world says that the world is going to end. The world is not going to end. The world is unlikely to end. The world is unlikely to end. But our own cultural pathologies have convinced us that it is. Because our own culture reads the world for us. It reads the world for us kind of just like a computer operating system is. Just like a computer operating system does. And I want to make this analogy, this conscious analogy, because I've found that students kind of get this very, very quickly, that our bodies, the physical world is kind of like a computer. But our culture is kind of like an operating system, that we run these versions of culture in our heads. And in our heads right now, just like you can run like Windows X or just like you can run an Apple X or Windows 10 or you're running a GUI Linux system. That what's running in our heads right now is culture like Western civilization, like 7.8 or whatever. And every time they update the system, it gets a little quirky and it develops a few bugs. And we think that death wands work. And we think that the end of the world is going to be within 12 to 20 years. And that is part of our own subjective reality. And whether it's just a painted on floor or not is irrelevant. We think it's real, and therefore it becomes real. And when we try to interact with other cultures, sometimes we're really just trying to move information from one operating system to another. And this causes a lot of problems. This is one of the reasons that we have these sort of cultural disagreements, that it's really not intrinsic arguments between two individuals, but rather sets of different subjective realities that are refusing to interlock together. Somebody says, well, we need to save the planet. We need to do this. And somebody's like, I don't believe in that. And the world's not going to end in 20 years. And besides, I'm worried about, getting cursed by a death wand. I saw some Kaddicha men the other day, and I'm kind of worried. This is how cultures interact with one another, or rather how they sometimes argue and fail to interact. It's different subjective realities failing to interlock with each other at the same time and causing disagreements and arguments together. And, sometimes not the right interpersonal speaking distance. So sociocultural anthropologists study culture. They take people and place them under microscopes and study the variability of human operating systems that are found across the planet. Each culture has its own set of priorities and perceptions that greatly affect both behavior and the institutions within those cultures. Individuals will act and react according to the manner that they perceive to be best. They react rationally, but they are reacting rationally to a subjective reality. The little kid might sweat. He might call for his mommy. He might get really upset. And no amount of you explaining to him that the canyon is painted on the floor is going to convince him. So, anthropology studies other cultures. And in studying other cultures and studying how other cultures build institutions and beliefs and then function with those institutions and beliefs, cultural anthropology does two things that are really interesting, two really valuable things. One, it shows how human universals work in terms of differing cultures. And two, it reflects how different human groups handle and cope with the same sets of problems that we do. When you study another culture, to some extent, you are holding up a mirror to your own culture and seeing yourself distorted and reinterpreted within the subjective reality of other people. And sociocultural anthropology looks at that mirror and attempts to answer that question, which was posed by a fellow named Franz Boas, whom we will meet in the next lecture. And he gave this mission statement to cultural anthropology. And the mission statement is, why are the tribes and the nations of the world different, and how have the present differences developed? Because he is going to look at how we study culture and how you interpret these different subjective realities and the belief systems and institutions that those realities engender. And we're going to do this in basically three different ways. Because you can take all of sociocultural anthropology and really kind of boil it down into three basic methods to study subjective reality, to study another group of humans' culture. And this is what I've done with the three books that are in this class. Ruth Benedict's The Chrysanthemum and the Sword is a very Boasian way to study culture. It's a way of studying culture where you intensely study the culture and then offer psychological and philosophical interpretations of that culture. Then we're going to look at how Napoleon Shannon explained the culture of the Yanomamo. And he took a very functional perspective on this culture, looking at how the internal structures of a culture function and how they serve the needs of the people within that culture. And lastly, we're going to look at Lilia Abu Lughud's description of Bedouin women in Western Egypt. And this is a very postmodern anthropology where they look at the people and allow the people to narratively build their own subjective realities and look at how these realities function and how the people interact, almost in a literary manner with the worlds that they create. And that's what we're going to do in this class. And it all starts with Franz Boas. And we'll meet Franz Boas next time. And I will see you there.